Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Women in Tech Dorset webinar with Tracey Camilleri. Tracey Camilleri is the co-founder of the leadership and organizational development consultancy Thompson. At Saïd Business School at Oxford University, she designed and directed various bespoke senior development programs. Tracey is known for her innovative design approach, her focus on the humanities, and what it means to be human in a world increasingly dominated by process and machines. I met Tracey when I attended the Oxford Strategic Leadership Program. Her style and approach had a profound impact on how I view modern leadership, and I'm thrilled that she's joining us today and sharing her insights with us. Over to you, Tracey.
Thanks so much, Simi, and it's really thrilling to be here this afternoon, and particularly, as I said, Simi, I was born in Christchurch in Dorset and went to school in Dorset until I was 18, so a lot of my heart lies there. So it's lovely to be with you. And another confession, women in tech's quite daunting for me. I'm the woman who this Easter had to ask my son how to get the arrow pointing the right way on Google Maps. But what I'd love to do is to spend a bit of time talking about leadership. And those of you, I imagine most of you are women on the call, women in tech, you must all be leaders. And to give you just some of my wisdom over the years, as Simi says, I've worked with many people coming through Oxford Saïd Business School and at Thompson, thinking about leadership and thinking particularly about how you lead thriving teams. And recently we've published this book, The Social Brain. It came out at the end of February, that we wrote with evolutionary psychologist Robin Dunbar. So I'm going to draw on some of that research and some of my lived experience. But please, 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 do put any questions on the chat. The questions are always, to me, the most interesting bit. I mean, one of these things where I can't see myself, I can only see the slide. So please, yeah, do. I'll pause halfway through for any questions, and anything is game. I'm happy to. I probably won't know the answer, and particularly if they're technical questions. But let's kick off. So I was going to suggest 6 ways to recharge your leadership, and I'll go through 3 of them and then pause and see if you've got any questions that come to mind. And particularly, I thought I'd focus on, challenges for women in leadership. So without further ado, I'll carry on. So the first thing is to concentrate on your most precious resource. I mean, in this time of cost of living and, extreme pressure on business and any kind of organization, actually, we're all thinking about resources. But the most precious resource that you have is your time and your attention. And I would say that for women in tech, you're living in multiple worlds, digital worlds, familial worlds, operational worlds, and actually men's worlds as well. In our book, we talk about the different leadership styles, and there's no good and bad in this, but different leadership styles between the male and the female. And it's exhausting sometimes living in those multiple worlds. So thinking about time as a finite resource rather than endlessly layering things on top is one of the key skills of being a successful leader. And thinking about where you're putting your attention as well. What are you focusing on? Is it the same old stuff? Or are you focusing on the right things? Design thinking for time, be a time lord, be a time lady, I don't know. But that the word no is quite a good word to use. And also thinking about the pain points during the course of your week. I quite often do a really, really simple thing, which is get a group together and get them to bring their diaries from the past week and to look at how they're spending their time and where they could actually carve out more useful and productive time, and time for themselves as well. avoid the tyranny of reaction. Again, we're constantly, our inboxes are loaded up with other people's priorities, and how, again, you can impose some discipline at the start of this spring to take back control of how you spend that time. Time out is time in. It's interesting, how many leaders feel they're just so exhausted and feeling guilty about taking time out. Really, really important. We weren't built to work all the time, and having that discipline and modeling it for others as well. Reflection is work. I was coaching a guy the other day, and I said this to him: reflection is work. And he said, oh my goodness, I'm in an open plan office. There's no way I could just sit at my desk and people would think, what is he doing? Is he doing nothing? Even though I was thinking. And it's really, really important, if you are in the position to make decisions and so on, to make that time to reflect. And again, worked with a company in Belgium recently where a woman leader, carved out, no meeting Wednesdays. And you guys may already be doing that, but having time to think long thoughts rather than the tiny staccato thoughts that we have time for when in the business of the day to day. And then finally on this one, don't forget timing. You can't keep things at the same pitch through the week. We need to recover. We need to have a rhythm to the week. And also, when I'm designing leadership programs, I think about the rhythm of the day as well. Our circadian rhythms. All of you will know there are times of the day when you can think really clearly or really grapple with difficulty, and times when you just don't feel so alive. Light is really important as well. We quite often work in dim lighting, and it's very depleting of energy. So really think about punctuating your week and for your teams as well. So that's my first recharge, really thinking about your time and your attention. So the second one is disentangle yourself. Quite often we can't see the wood for the trees, and we remain loyal to ideas, to ways of working, to processes that actually should be obsolete. So some of you may be aware of the work of Ron Heifetz, Harvard professor, where he talks about the need sometimes to get off the dance floor onto the balcony, where you can look down and see patterns as they're emerging, see actually what's in the process of becoming, and that zooming out and zooming in capability. Sometimes, of course, you're on the dance floor with everyone else. Sometimes you need to change the music, but sometimes you need to get onto the balcony and look down and get a bit of distance. I don't need to tell you guys, find workarounds or pause, but working in a business school as I do, and in other corporations, it's amazing how many times people just say, oh, well, you can't do that, or we can't do this, or this doesn't work. And actually just pausing sometimes and bringing the approach of the designer to things, which is, what are the pain points? How can I design around this, or stop, or why are we banging our heads against the wall here? Take just one step back. It's amazing. Timi said she came on the Oxford Strategic Leadership Program at Oxford, and we did some follow-up conversations with people. And one of the most powerful things people did was just simply take one step back. It actually takes confidence to do that. And you feel maybe I'm stepping away, but actually what happens is magical, is that others step into the space that you've left. They grow into it, they develop, and it gives you that ability to think just one tiny step back. Any of you who've got teenage children, you'll know that that's a very powerful thing as well as a parent, taking a step back. Jettison old ideas of yourself. Again, it always amazes me how really senior people are stuck with, I don't know, an idea of themselves, maybe that came out of their childhood. You know, you're not creative, you're the mathematical one, you're organized, you're, you know, and I was working with someone really senior in the civil service, really senior. And within about 3 minutes of meeting me, he told me he'd failed his 11 plus. And this weighed on him. And actually, we develop and change the whole time. And the joy of the kind of work I do is people discovering parts of themselves that they'd forgotten, parts of themselves, and doing things that they loved when they were younger. So it's worth revisiting those sort of set ideas of yourself and not boxing yourself. And then lastly, you know, rewild dead systems, dismantle unproductive routines, redesign new habits. Yeah, all very well for me to say. But underneath that, there is the need for leaders to ruffle things, to disturb complacency, things that don't really work, sometimes things that do work but could be more exciting. And we are addicted to the new in lots of ways, but going back and again, you're probably, as women in tech, brilliant at this, but repairing things, rewilding them, re-energizing them. We don't do enough of that, perhaps, because it's always exciting to do something new and to chuck out what is old. So that's my second. I'm going to stop after the next one. So please do put any questions or any thoughts, or I'd love to hear whether any of this resonates with you. And just to say, you know, some of it absolutely won't. But if there are one or two things that give you pause for thought, then I will be glad. So the next thing is step off dry land, into the swamp, I say. You know, if you absolutely know what you have to do and you know how you have to do it, you're managing, and goodness, we do need good management. I am absolutely not saying that we don't. But if you are leading, you don't know really how to do what you need to do. You're stepping into an uncertain future, and it takes bravery and it takes patience. And I say sit in the grey for a bit longer. If you've got to make a complex decision, people are always pushing you to make the decision quicker, that you're a better leader if you can be decisive, that to get straight to task makes us all feel safer. But that ability to hold uncertainty for a bit longer and to interrogate it is a real sign of strong leadership. Leadership's always about decisions, and good decisions, hopefully, if one has been able to really walk around a decision. Was interviewing someone who's the head of people for W.L. Gore, and she said, we have really developed decision-making frameworks, and she said we have this idea of waterline decisions, that if a ship is damaged beneath the waterline, it could sink it. So any decision that is beneath the waterline has to be taken collectively. But any decision that involves potential damage if it goes wrong above the waterline, in other words, it's not going to sink the ship. It may require a bit of metal beating to rectify it. Those decisions can be taken more quickly and by fewer people, and often by individuals. And I think having clear decision-making frameworks is a key part of leading, and what needs a lot of people to decide things and what can be decided quite quickly. Convening, again, I think convening is a really underexplored part of leadership. You have huge convening power. Here's Simi, who's convening all of you and you know, bringing people together to think together. And often our scope of who we could bring in to think about things is narrower than it needs to be. Think about your convening power and who you could bring in to bring new ideas into your organization. I've already really covered this. The future is the territory of leadership. No one knows how the future is going to unfold, and it does require stepping off dry land into the swamp. And, both and, not either or. I work in Oxford with a wonderful professor of zoology, and he's an expert on spiders and spiders' webs. He actually makes American football helmets out of spiders' webs because they're the strongest. They're stronger than any man-made material. And he has also been chairman of Save the Elephants. And he said to me once, you need to be able to noodle small with the spiders in the lab and also stride out on the open plain with the big beasts. And I think it is that ability to mix things up, to switch in and switch out. You're not one thing or another. You're both and I think that attitude and that inclusiveness and sort of generosity of spirit is also part of being a leader. I'm going to pause there. I've talked too long. I've got 3 more areas to focus on, but any questions at this point?
Yeah, Tracey, very interesting points. I've got a couple of things I wanted to ask you. One of the things you covered is obviously women in tech, and you mentioned, well, women in tech are actually leaders because they are leading the way. So I was thinking that if you were to elaborate on that, what is actually leadership? What is it? And I know this is more of a philosophical question perhaps, but what is really the meaning of leadership, especially around the perspective of women in tech who are coming in and joining in this? Might not be many of us, but in that perspective in particular.
Well, good question. Yes. There are many ways I think that women in tech are leaders. Partly because they are modeling a future that we hope other young people will follow. It is difficult, and you know much more about this than I do, but men and women, or the male and the female, we communicate in different ways at times. There's an interesting study of the US Supreme Court, which looked at the way women judges and male judges communicated in the Supreme Court, and found that women were much more likely to be interrupted. They had many more, just as I'm doing now, saying, pauses, and they put more politeness into the way that they were speaking. They didn't speak so much in finished statements. And as a result, they were getting less justice, less time, so less justice. And they had to change the way that giving evidence in the Supreme Court was structured. So one gave evidence uninterrupted for 10 minutes. That's just an example. Robin Dunbar, who's our co-author, did some research showing that any group that has a less than a quarter women or any minority in it, when you get to stressful, complicated discussions, that quarter is not enough, and that they tend to withdraw, actually. And he has done lots of studies looking at how people behave naturally in conferences, and you will have seen this yourself, conferences and so on, and tend to break into gender groups because it is exhausting, kind of speaking another language at times.
Yes, yeah, I think this is a really interesting perspective. Especially, I know you started off by saying that, so I thought we'll touch on that. I also think that in technologies specifically, we live in a world of constant change. So when we are talking about, almost, disentangling yourself, the thing is that a lot of the times the world is changing around you at such a speed that by the time you get to grips with that, now it's it makes it a bit more challenging to kind of disentangle yourself from that constant change. So I wonder whether you had any insights on how we could apply some of those rules in the ever-evolving and ever-changing world.
The world is changing, of course, but we are often not. And again, that was the advantage of writing this book with an evolutionary psychologist. Many things about how we behave as human beings in groups are unchanged for 12,000 years. I mean, we still prefer smaller groups where we are known and can be known. We produce social endorphins when we eat together, for example, when we walk together in rhythm, when we when we are with one another in person, when we laugh together. Singing together is huge for creating social endorphins, which are the body's own opiates. We need to feel like we belong. And all those things, there are things that sharing experiences help us to bond. We need to feel that we can continue to learn. We hate to be held still without learning. We need to feel we're in a fair system. And so you're right, Simi, the world is changing so fast, but much of human behavior actually doesn't change that much. And I think we're really living in a moment where the gap between the pace of the world changing and the speed and the size of the world, the digital world, the global world, and where are our edges? And I'm really conscious that, mental health in organizations is, I think the Deloitte study last year showed that 1 in 6 employees has, had some kind of mental health issue. That's huge. So I think thinking about how we, and particularly you guys who work in tech, how you keep the human side of things alive is really, really important as leaders, and how you look after each other. And I think that's what's so brilliant about your group, your support group, in a way, that you're there for each other.
Yeah, I think just a last one before we move on is a question around when you said taking a step back. So as you might be aware, obviously, that a lot of the women, especially women in tech that I've spoken to over the years, suffer from imposter syndrome. So I think that it takes a long time for you to carve out a way where you have either a seat at the table, or perhaps your views are being heard. And so taking just one step back perhaps is a little bit more difficult, I guess. And also it kind of perhaps enhances that imposter syndrome, where you're thinking, well, I've just made it, now I don't want to step back at all because I'm worried that I might be losing the little influence that I've gained. And I'm wondering what's your take on that?
I think everyone has imposter syndrome, not just women, but I think you're right, women probably suffer from it more than men. Any of us who take on a new job or a new role, we don't absolutely know how to do it. And I think perhaps, again, women feel that they need to be more qualified or more, overqualified to do things before they step into that swamp. I've often been really surprised by leaders like yourselves who come into leadership programs at Oxford or at Thompson Harrison, and they are leaders, they're chief executives, they're, CIOs or whatever, they've got big jobs, but they don't feel like they're leaders. And they look around and wonder whether everyone else has got an email telling them, exactly, how to be a leader, or they've got PhDs in leadership. And they realize that everybody feels a bit like this, and that actually, being yourself and, not feeling like a charlatan, not feeling, just because you don't know exactly how to do it. You're there for a reason. You've got your job, you were hired for a reason. And actually to sort of let go some of that feeling of being an imposter. And as I said, it takes confidence to take a step back, but it's actually a sign of strength and a sign of, and it's hugely empowering for others, and it gives you that room to breathe and gets you out of the weeds. So maybe half a step to start off with, but then a whole step.
Yeah, that's a brilliant idea. Half a step at a time.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Shall I carry on then?
Yes, yes.
And anyone else, please do feel like chucking ideas in, So the fourth thing is, how do you create environments for human thriving? I've always been interested in this. And you asked me, Simi, before how I think about leadership. And, there's a lot of leadership work that focuses on polishing up particular traits or looking in a certain way or particular types of personality. For me, good leadership sits in the relationship, not in the individual. The relationship between you and the people who follow you. It's a relational thing. And I think that's a helpful thing to remember. It's not all about you. It's about how you relate to people. And my second point is, design social strategies with the same rigor as digital or financial strategies. And I'll explain what I mean by that. We live in this hybrid moment where, particularly, you guys are working in tech. I was speaking to a management consultancy who said they were working with quite a lot of organizations where the tech teams only got to get together in person once or twice a month. They were working remotely. And when we come together in person, it needs to matter. There was a Microsoft Work Trends survey in 2021 that showed during the pandemic, our relationships narrowed and thinned. We need, as human beings, to come together. We need to see one another. We need to be in the same room. We need, our five senses are really important. And so what I mean is that leaders need to think like social designers. How can we make these meetings really, really count and really matter? Beginnings and endings. Again, we've just done some research around Gen Z and the first transition into work. They were all graduates, actually, but it was palpable how many of them talked about being inducted virtually, feeling kind of unconnected, and that they didn't belong in new jobs. And quite often we forget to have proper human beginnings for projects, for roles, and designing proper beginnings, human beginnings, where we know who we're working with and we know we can get to know their strengths and weaknesses and so on, and to work towards being more than the sum of our parts, or indeed, to help new joiners really feel part of what we're doing. Endings too, hugely important. There are so many organizations where people are carrying on working on projects that haven't properly been ended, and they don't realize that the leaders have turned away and are working on something else they'd forgotten. Really bringing things to a proper end, honoring them, thinking about what was learned, even if, they're abandoned, what was the value in doing those things and bringing things to an end. It's a really important part of leadership. And then also building connective and reciprocal skills in your organization. I've been working in leadership development for many years, and there's a lot about, how you give presentations, how you do public speaking. It's all broadcast, whereas particularly at the moment, and I think because we spent, best part of 2 years, sort of not meeting one another, those conversational, facilitative, convening skills, the sorts of things I was talking about earlier, are really important. Curiosity, asking great questions, those things are really important to help people with, and they, we just assume they're going to happen naturally, but they don't necessarily. So that's my fourth area. And just on that point, in our book, we interviewed many leaders in different areas, from leaders of orchestras to army leaders to entrepreneurs to people working in government, thinking about what were the conditions for real thriving, human thriving, where groups of people were more than the sum of their parts. And we discovered that there were 6 foundational conditions that you can fast track, you can build as a leader. You know, we need to feel purposeful, that the work we do matters and has meaning. It's not meaningless. Culture, people have a huge appetite for ritual, for stories, for symbols, for a sense of shared identity. I've already spoken about learning and the need to feel that one develops and is being developed. And again, you know, we've really cut short a lot of the incidental learning that comes from just simply sitting alongside one another and learning from one another, just even, you know, how you answer the phone and so on. There's a lot of learning and just being together. Values, fairness, you know, came out as being hugely important. But again, for leaders, thinking about where values clash, and that's a place for leadership. Belonging, I've spoken about. Why am I here? Why do I matter? Why would it matter if I wasn't here? What would be missed? Who knows me? What do I belong to? Those are really foundational questions. And then connection. Again, Robin Dunbar, our co-author, talks in the book about friendship and the importance for friendship at work, and the sort of things that you're doing with this Women in Tech community. Having 5 friends is the best health insurance you could possibly have, better than losing weight, giving up smoking, changing your diet. It's the strongest connection to health. And making time for friendship at work and the building of trust is part of the work. It's not time out, it's time in. So my 5th, pay attention to tipping points and thresholds, those moments when things tip over into being something else. And those are the points where leadership is needed. There's so much focus at the moment on growth, growing businesses, growing organizations, but less focus on the stresses that growth brings. And again, in our book, we look at the importance of numbers and, you know, what happens when you go from 5 to 15, from 15 to 50, from 50 to 150, at 150, which is actually the Dunbar number. And it's the number beyond which weird stuff happens, as Chris Cox at Facebook said in 2005, when there were only 100 people in Facebook. It's Patty McBride from Netflix called it the stand on a chair number, but it is the number at which reciprocal behavior tips over into being transactional. And again, in our book, Robin talks about how this is linked to our brain size, really. We don't have a big enough neocortex or long enough days to sustain more than 150 relationships at the same time. And you'll remember back 2 points ago that I believe leadership exists in the relationship. So thinking about how you lead and thinking about the size of your organization, really important. The second point, leadership styles vary at different scales. If you've got a tight team of 5, and interestingly, perhaps for you, there's a study of software teams, 58 software teams, and the 5 most successful had an average of 4.4 people in the team. The 5 least successful had 7.8 in the team. With 5 people, you don't need a leader. You can work really fast. You can mentalize with one another. It's a great size for creativity, a great size for crisis teams as well. But if you want to make complex decisions, you need between 12 and 15. And there you need facilitative leadership. I've got a graphic in a minute to show you what I mean by this. There are a lot of groups with too many people in them. They're unproductive. And if you've got 12 to 15, you need to make the most of that diversity by having really, really good facilitative leadership. At 50, you need structure. You start to need structure because of the way information travels around the system. And I'll show you a graphic in a minute about that. Matching team size to task, I've already touched on that. And the thing is to match the leadership as well. And too often you get, I don't know, town hall meetings with tons and tons of people. You can't really have a facilitative conversational leadership style there. You've got to lead in a different sort of way. So that's another skill. Light fires as often as you put them out. I know that sounds a very confusing thing to say, but that is the job of leadership. When things get boring, when things get predictable, you need to start lighting fires. And at the same time, you need to be like a heat-seeking missile. They're also, when things get too hot or too full of conflict, it's your role to put them out. And to work with and against the grain of our inherited biology. I always think, goodness, there's just such simple things you can do. I mean, things like on our programs, if we've got a difficult meeting, we will always begin with a brunch or a meal together, a structured meal. Produces social endorphins, completely changes the outcome of the day. Too often one has the difficult meeting, and then if it goes well, maybe we'll go out for a drink afterwards, but having it before. So often working with the grain, they're just such simple things that one can do. And we've got all sorts of practical examples in this book. But sometimes we need to work against it. Or we are homophilic by nature. We tend to like people like us. We like people who've had a similar education, or people who like the same music as us. That can be positive at times, but you also need to bring in difference as well. We tend to free ride if we're not being observed. If the team gets too big, you start to get free riders, and you've got to work against the grain of that. We are actually attracted to hierarchy. We like to feel we're more important than someone else, but actually in a complex system, which is where we all work, flatter structures are much more flexible and much more able to react to the change that Semya was talking about in our environments. So just quickly, there's a graphic, and you can get this of matching team size to task. As I said, the different sorts of size of team that can increase performance. And I mentioned as well different kinds of leadership at different sorts of scales. And by the time you get to 500, people don't know you. They will project upon you their hopes and their fears, but you are occupying a symbolic space. But there's a lot you can do with that. A gesture can be hugely powerful in a symbolic space. And there's quite a lot for this, but and I won't go into this in much detail, but it's just quite a useful way of thinking, where should I be and how should I be when and where? So, what I mean by leadership at the threshold is, you need to be talking to the challengers. You need to be listening to the voices at the edge, as well as obviously customers, clients, and so on. How I've talked about ending things, connecting people up, asking better questions, convening, those things I've already mentioned. When are you needed as a leader? You're needed when things get hot. You're needed when there are roadblocks and setbacks, but you're needed to give consistency, a drumbeat. And you're needed when people are uncertain. And where there's silence, any of you who've got kids, you always know when things go quiet, you're needed. When people get stuck at the edges of systems and between silos, there's the places. And the last one is to take care of yourself. And I think, living in different worlds as you do, digital worlds, real worlds, familial worlds, and so on, sometimes you can forget to take care of yourself, but you can't take care of others if you don't take care of yourself. Recovery is really, really important. And, often we don't factor in time for recovery. Do a huge project, it's successful, and we immediately turn into the next project. We go and conquer Spain, and then we say, right, let's go and conquer France. The team needs time to recover. You need time to recover, to think, what did we do, to celebrate it, to learn from it, to draw breath, to have a little bit of time to get strength back. The World Health Organization in the 1950s originally just defined well-being as mental, physical, and social health. I think in the UK last year, we spent £56 billion on mental health issues and, all kinds of mitigations. But most of it was focused at the mental and physical, and very little at the social health. It's like friendship. There's been an epidemic of loneliness. And so that's a really, really important part of this moment that we're living through, is thinking about that. Find a thought partner. You've got each other in this group, but actually finding someone who's not necessarily your actual partner at home, because burdening them with your worries is sometimes you just need to go home and forget those. And often if it's someone at work, it's complicated. But finding someone you can really think with, and that they can give you really honest and truthful and generous spirited help. Don't forget your friends outside work. When eventually, if ever any of us retire, those friendships, if you've let them go, you need to invest in them and, really, really value them. And be yourself. I mean, Simi, you talked about imposter syndrome. We always feel maybe we need to be heroes. We need to be something we're not. Actually, you are hard for a very particular reason, and you are enough. Be yourself. Be yourself with skill, and learn and develop and be curious. But don't try and be someone else. Van Gogh said life's probably round. I just put this here because we spend a lot of time trying to put round things into square holes. We're human beings, and technology is magical, it's marvelous, but we are not computers, we are not built like that. So you guys are at the nexus of both, and you are guardians of the humanity of your teams, and also the brilliance of their technological know-how. And I've already mentioned this, friendship at work, hugely, hugely important. And I think you guys together in this group are doing really brilliant things in that respect. So just that's thank you. And I'd love to hear. We've got a few more bit more time. I'd love to hear any more questions from you guys. Simi, can you end my screen for me so I can actually see you?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So thank you very much, Tracey, for that talk. I still have some questions. We also have some participation. So wanted to go back to the Thrive model, and wanted to know a little bit about the state when we're growing. So you talked about companies growing, and we are in that time where there are scale ups, and we're trying to be more efficient, get more business, be more profitable, and so on. So what would you say goes through the life of a team, or when it grows from, let's say, from 15 to 50? What are some of the things that we need to be aware of as we're growing from that number into the next stage?
Well, it's a really good question, and we spent a lot of time thinking about this. There is a sense of mourning actually that happens as one grows. And of course, that's what you want as well. You want growth. But there's a sense at 5, it was all in our heads. I can know what you're thinking about, the next person's thinking about, what Sharon's thinking. And I don't have to stop and debrief. I don't have to have any bureaucracy. We can just work alongside each other beautifully. We can be creative. We can solve problems. We can cope with crises. Once you get to 15, you do start to need someone who's going, by the way, back to 5, I do think you need, if you're in a team of 5 within a big organization, you need someone protecting you, though, because if you don't watch it, you can become a bit maverick, moving faster than the rest of the organization. At 15, you need facilitative leadership. You need to bring everyone in. You need to be able to stop and say, and to synthesize. At 50, you start to need levels. And that, again, there's a sense of loss. We used to all have it in our heads and our hearts, and now we start to need levels. Beyond 50, you start to need specialists. And that's why groups, and I don't know if any of you have experienced this, but we found move quite quickly from 50 to 150, because suddenly you've got someone leading HR and so on and so on. And it seems like it's you've got too many people for 50, but you can, you go to 150 quite quickly. But, as I said, beyond 150, the weird stuff happens. And what we've been very interested in, and it'd be interesting if any of you are thinking of this, is that there are a lot of organizations at the moment rethinking their structure. And, we're not saying you can only have 150, but actually thinking of your organization in more like a honeycomb, or in terms of fractals rather than pyramids, where you, one of the key things you do as a leader is to build other leaders, so that you are leading all the time relationally, that it's human all the time. And there's W.L. Gore used to build a different plant every 150 people, and that's quite radical. But it's that idea of growing big by staying small, which sounds odd, but thinking in smaller units, and thinking there of the overall leader, not sitting atop a pyramid, but actually, directing and connecting all the time between different sorts of fractals. It's a more nomadic form of leadership, a more sort of lattice framework, which again you in technology be more familiar with than perhaps some more traditional organizations. I don't know, does that answer your question, Simi?
Yes, yeah. I also wanted to find out, actually, just expanding on something you said, is that there is almost a mourning period. So this is very common between organizations that are growing, that when you grow from, let's say, 15 to 50, you feel this sense of change. You feel like there is some hierarchy coming in. We all used to be together. We used to know, like you're saying, how it feels, how we used to think, and now there's just this being enforced on us, or and all of those things. So what in terms of leadership would you would be your recommended approach, or do you think is the role of leadership to rally the troops at that level, and to kind of almost I don't want to say deal with, but what's the best way to handle that feeling amongst people, that feeling of loss?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting point. I mean, 50 is the point at which, founders often feel, oh, this wasn't what I had in mind when I founded this. It's got too big. It's not what I wanted. It's not a family anymore. But I think, what do leaders do? There is the possibility, it says fictive kinship, that it is the getting on the balcony. It is your key tool at the points of, we could talk about scalar stress, those points of stress where you're having to change the structure and change what people are used to. Conversation is your key tool. And you have to really watch those moments so you don't lose your best people. And you need to, the tendency is always to swing the pendulum too far the other way, is to go back to the half a step, to move in half steps, and to keep testing and experimenting and getting really good feedback loops as well, and to getting people feeling that they are participators in this change. They are authors of it as well, that they're not powerless within it. But it is difficult. And, those moments, as you see on, on the Thrive model, it's quite interesting that 5, 15, 50, 150, there's a sort of stability to those numbers. Robin thinks it's something to do with the way information passes around the system, but that around 100 is much less stable. But there's something the organization comes to rest in its growth at certain points and breathes and recovers. But it's tricky. It's really tricky. And often we don't think enough about the stresses. We just think about the growth and think about it being positive and think about it in terms of revenue and profit, rather than in terms of the lived experience of the people within.
Yes. I just, on another point, you mentioned that friendship, and I know it's in your book as well, about how friendships are kind of the best thing you can do for your health. And I think I would like for you to elaborate on it a little bit more, on the research around it, because I think when you think about health, obviously a lot of us think about other factors, not to say they don't have an impact, but relatively.
Yeah, I mean, I'm obviously saying, there's other things have an impact, but really interestingly, recovery from heart attack, the most important thing is to have 5 friends. And 5 friends is interesting. If you have too many friends, then you don't have that kind of depth of reciprocal connection. It's too surface. We've got the capacity for 5 kind of best friends. And it's about the amount of time you spend. We spend about 40% of our social pro-social time with 5 people, 60% with 15. So it's who you're spending time with as well. And this, as we talked about, this epidemic of loneliness, which is really terrible for people's physical health, obviously for their mental health, but their physical health as well. And Robin always says, if you want to give up smoking, make non-smoking friends. It's extraordinary. That the power of friendship. So it's something that we just imagine just happens. We don't invest in it. We don't forgive enough. We don't make plans enough. We're exhausted. We're busy. We can go back and sit in front of Netflix. But it's hugely important. And friendship at work, do you have a friend at work, is one of the key questions that Gallup asks in its yearly, engagement survey. And it's the most important in terms of retention. I did a project with Marks and Spencer's a long time ago, and they were instituting part-time work, and they decided, well, the best thing to do would, you could work part-time until the beginning of the coffee break, and then the next part-time shift would start after the coffee break. And quite quickly they had to change that, because they realized in the coffee break, that was when not only it was the meaning, and the connection and the friendship that people got working in a store, but it was also when they talked about the new stock, they talked about things that had happened, the gossip, the connection with the products, hugely important. So yeah, friendship is something I think that is part of work. It's not time out from work.
That's perfect. I think that's probably the note to end this with. But thank you very much for your time. I think we are in Women in Tech Dorset is basically the foundation of it is let's say a conversation between Sharon and I, where we started talking about what we could do for the larger community, and we had been doing work in silos, and we came together to move forward. But thank you very much for all of your insights, and I'm sure that everybody had a lot to learn from them. And we look forward to perhaps hosting you on a panel soon, and maybe inviting you back to Dorset for our in-person event.
Yes, definitely. Well, thank you, Simi, and thank you, Sharon, as well, and for everyone who's listened. It's been a real thrill and a pleasure.
All right, thank you very much.
Okay.
Bye.